We'll now hear the presentation of TekSavvy Solutions Inc. Please introduce yourself and your colleagues, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairperson, Vice Chairperson, Commissioners, and staff. My name is Andy Kaplan-Mirth. I am VP of Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at TekSavvy. To my right is Janet Lowe, VP of Privacy and Consumer Legal Affairs. And to my left is TekSavvy's Chief Technology Officer, Charlie Burns. Our experts attending today are first on my far left, Webb Henderson's Ish Omar from Australia, and on my far right, Martin Roeder, MFR Consulting from the United States. Our regulatory analysts seated behind me are Stephanie Miller and Bryson Massey. TekSavvy is Canada's largest independent internet service provider with over 300,000 subscribers across Canada. Based in Chatham, Ontario, we have over 700 employees in Ontario and Quebec. We deliver internet services to our customers largely by buying wholesale services from incumbents. They only sell us those services because the CRTC mandated it. And over the past decade, we have paid incumbents nearly $1 billion for those services. And now we're ready to do the same on mobile. Our mission is to offer Canadians the real competition they deserve for communication services, but we can't do that for mobile services yet. On the wireline side, we've lowered prices not once, but twice for our customers in the past 4 years. TekSavvy was one of the first ISPs to offer unlimited packages, and we also actively fight to protect net neutrality and privacy rights. The value and price point of the services we deliver is central to our customer experience. This is possible because we're different, in a good way, from the big three incumbents. We're not beholden to shareholder interests. And as you heard in the sales practices hearing, we do business with our customers honestly, transparently, and fairly.
TekSavvy is an independent competitor that makes significant investments in traditional telecommunications facilities. We are investing $26 million to build fiber-to-the-home infrastructure for 38,000 homes and businesses in the Chatham-Kent area. But more relevant to this wireless hearing at hand, we are working to modernize our fixed wireless network with LTE in southwestern Ontario. We have kept MVNO in mind when selecting a suitable core network solution, and we are prepared to further integrate or introduce the necessary network components to enable the provision of mobile wireless services. This will position TekSavvy to be a wireless competitor under a full MVNO regime.
The big three are against real competition. They consistently act to keep prices high, and they will continue to do so, protecting their above-normal profits if their entrenched dominant position is not challenged. Their strategy to achieve this is woefully transparent. It illustrates market power and market failure. Do not fall for their competition theater designed to stave off wireless wholesale obligations that mandate real competition. It is more important than ever for independent competitors like TekSavvy to be able to offer wireless services. People come to TekSavvy because they want an alternative to the incumbents. But consumers today expect quad-play offerings, and mobile is a critical part of that. As long as consumers are stuck with an incumbent because of their mobile service, TekSavvy's margins are likely to fall to unsustainable levels.
First, let's be clear. The needs of Canadians are not fairly served by the current wireless market. We agree with the Competition Bureau that the wireless business is highly consolidated and the big three exercise market power. You've heard several times on the record of this proceeding that consumers pay too much for wireless services. Canadians have demanded lower prices and more choice for wireless services. Over 75,000 Canadians took action to support the government's new policy direction, which encourages all forms of competition and lower prices, and over 152,000 Canadians spoke up to support your decision, fostering greater competition for wireline internet services. The CRTC's own survey results show that only 8% of Canadians have seen wireless prices go down in the past 3 years. Moreover, 95% of Canadians believe wireless prices are higher in Canada than elsewhere in the world. And CCTS complaints about wireless services have increased across all mobile carriers. The Commission must be skeptical of the incumbents' recent attempts to avoid regulation. Flanker brands, wireless affordability trust marks, and so-called unlimited offers are feeble attempts by dominant players to pretend that there's no problem. The problem is clear, and only mandated full MVNO will solve it.
Regulatory action is needed now to address the lack of competition, and the solution is right in front of us. The full MVNO model is the only solution that would bring competition, drive prices down, and encourage investments while complementing the existing regulatory framework that brought competition to internet. Since dominant wireless carriers exercise unconstrained market power, mandating full MVNOs is the only way that affordability and lower prices will be sustainably achieved in the Canadian wireless market. And the full MVNO solution is consistent with the 2019 policy direction that requires the Commission to encourage all forms of competition and reduce barriers for entry into the market. This full MVNO framework must be backed by fair rates and terms mandated by the CRTC. It must also allow MVNOs to have the maximum degree of control possible, minimizing their reliance on incumbents that consistently act to eliminate competition, and maximizing opportunities for service innovation. The full MVNO framework must also not have obligations related to facilities or minimum investment levels. Canada's well-established framework for wholesale wireline competition has no such requirements. Properly set wholesale rates will contribute to MNOs' revenues, adequately compensate MNOs for their investments, and allow MVNOs to capitalize their own investments. Other more limited MVNO proposals before you would merely crown a very small number of new facilities-based fourth incumbents in a small number of areas. Admitting one more spectrum-holding legacy incumbent into the MNO's private club will not create the competitive diversity that Canadians need. Only a full MVNO model will. The benefits of MVNOs are real, as seen in other jurisdictions, and as TekSavvy detailed in our written submissions. For example, the United States and Australia offer important examples of innovative and differentiated MVNO services.
In Australia, there are a diversity of MVNOs, which are a material part of the mobile services market. Notably, MVNOs that have been most successful in Australia are the ones that drive innovations. In this regard, some Australian MVNOs play a special role to address the low-cost end of the market, typically with offers that are significantly more affordable than the mobile incumbent operators offer themselves. The presence of MVNOs as a whole has brought favourable prices to all Australian consumers, high broadband performance, and high customer satisfaction. In Australia, greater competitive intensity reduced retail mobile prices by 30% in 3 years. As a result, mobile networks serve a greater and more diverse base of end users than would otherwise be the case without inefficient overbuilding. Meanwhile, there's been no meaningful impact on MNO revenues. While MVNOs in the Australian market emerged on a commercial basis, a key feature of the wireline dynamic is structural separation, where infrastructure-based competition is inefficient.
MVNOs deliver benefits to American consumers through pricing structures and service features that are attractive to consumers who've been neglected by the major MNOs. MVNOs also rate higher for customer service and quality of service than MNOs. This is true despite a more challenging competitive atmosphere in the US as compared to Australia, since two of the largest MNOs exercise dominant market power in their negotiations with MVNOs, which has hampered the impact of MVNOs and limited their scope. For example, American MVNOs pay higher than competitive market prices and are not able to operate as full MVNOs. MVNOs have not negatively impacted MNOs' investments or performance. Instead, Wholesale access has contributed to MNO revenues and profits. The two smaller MNOs are open to more fair MVNO arrangements because they have enjoyed benefits through increased, more efficient, productive use of their investments in facilities. Unfortunately, the situation for MVNOs and competition is likely to get worse now with approvals of the merger of the third and fourth largest MNOs.
Full MVNO will allow new entrants and regional competitors to bring sustainable competition, to reduce prices, increase choice for all Canadians, and spur innovations in mobile service offerings. Canadians have waited many years for competition and increased choice for wireless, and they cannot afford to wait another 5 years for failed regulatory solutions. The time has never been better to open up wireless to meaningful competition. TekSavvy is ready to deliver the same benefits to wireless consumers as we have for 2 decades on wireline internet. Thank you for the opportunity to present today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner MacDonald.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your comments this afternoon and for your comments throughout the process. I think we have a good understanding of exactly what you want and why you want it. But I do want to start off our time together with a few points of clarification on different matters. And the first one is we've seen a number of different studies as of late pointing to wireless prices going down in recent months and years. And you've acknowledged that prices have decreased, but you state that this is a result of regulatory action. And although I'm sure we'd all love to take all of the credit, I'm wondering why you feel that competition doesn't account for those decreases.
Wireless prices are undeniably high in Canada. There have been some small changes in the market, certainly over the last, say, 5 years, possibly as a result of the mandated roaming regime in the last major review. Those are extremely limited competitive effects that just allow one new competitor, essentially, to slightly undercut the dominant 3 carriers. We don't see that as sustainable, dynamic competition that's going to result in a variety of services at a variety of prices that are available to Canadians across the country. Certainly, I think the new services in the last year, say the unlimited throttled services in the past year, I think cannot be seen out as being anything other than the result of the regulatory pressure. They did not emerge previously, although they were present in other places. I think it seems utterly transparent to me that those are, I think they are good services. I think they ought to have come along sooner, but I think they are clearly here now, not as a result of competitive pressure, but because of the regulatory environment. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. If I can add to that, if we look at the last 5 years, we still see a very high concentration of market share by the big 3 dominant providers. And as the Competition Bureau mentioned throughout its presentation, the big 3 still possess market power and exercise that. And we've seen the Bureau also mention that market power allows the big 3 to coordinate high prices and keep retail prices high for Canadian consumers. So we see the international comparisons in terms of where Canada's prices are relative to the world. But it's the control, the ability to control and keep prices high in the Canadian market that sort of reinforce, I think, what you're hearing from Canadians, which is that prices for wireless remain too high.
Thank you. At paragraph 86 of your additional comments from November the 22nd, you submitted that MVNOs, Canadian MVNOs, currently enjoy profit levels which constitute a significant margin of 4.6 to 5.2 percentage points over levels typically found in competitive telecom markets. Can you just define for me how you would define a competitive telecom market in that situation?
The context for those EBITDA figures, I believe we're citing a study that indicated that investment levels by incumbents would remain consistent down to EBITDA levels of 37%. My understanding is that the, I believe, 43% EBITDA levels that we cited here are above normal for that market. And the purpose of us raising it in our submission was really that there was plenty of room for EBITDA levels to come down before having any impact on incumbent investments. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I can comment on the financial, aspect of that. Do you want to? Oh.
Yeah, I would just also point to paragraph 25 of the same further comments there. Really, the point we're making is that the profitability levels and the EBITDA levels of Canada's national operators is significantly higher than in other markets. And, we've seen that recently reflected in the Broadcasting and Telecom Legislative Review report as well. I think Canadian oligopoly of big telecoms are very healthy. They're proving that in terms of the earnings that they're reporting. So we've got some capturing there in paragraph 25 in terms of their EBITDA levels. And as Andy said, that paragraph 86 that you referred to earlier, Commissioner McDonald, was in reference to a report that was submitted as part of Cogeco's submission, where it sort of similarly reflected that EBITDAs are high.
Okay, thank you for that. And in your May 15th intervention, you submitted, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but the three national carriers have captured over 90% of the market. And the result of that is that the market is insufficiently competitive. If 90-ish% isn't the right mix spread across the three largest operators, what should that number be in your mind in a competitive market? Is it 80? Is it 70? Is it 60?
So it's not the 90% on its own that it would be identified with it being a non-competitive market. Their 90% market share allows them to operate without competing effectively. They have divided the market 30-30-30, and they are comfortable there, and there is nothing to effectively disrupt that. What would constitute a competitive market would not be a particular market share or change in market share. It would be the nature of interactions that we saw in the market that would show that it was a competitive market.
What interactions in the market would you hope to see that you're not seeing right now?
So I don't think that you could see it with three MNOs. I think if MVNOs were in the market and actively participating, then what you would and were an accepted part of the market dynamic. So MNOs saw the value of wholesale and used it to their advantage. Then you would see MNOs trying to work with MVNOs to build their market share. And you would see MVNOs, grow as a result and compete with each other. And you would see different MNOs, market shares shifting as a result. So it's the dynamic competitive environment that would change as opposed to a specific number of market concentration.
So what's particularly striking about the 90%, and again, I'll go back to the Competition Bureau's presentation, is not just the number, but what they're able to do with that 90%, which is together they possess market power, which means they are able to control prices in the retail marketplace. So I'm not able to provide a specific number, but I think the threshold that we would be looking for where we could say, competition is achieved is where no single or combination of firms could together control prices in the marketplace, i.e. they wouldn't have market power, and that would be what you would be looking for in terms of whether there's a sufficiently competitive marketplace.
Is any of the concern that the three providers are relatively similar in their overall share of the market that they get? Right now, they're a third, and a third, reaching about 90%. We could have more competition, and they could be 25, 25, 25, and still have the same breakdown. Would that still lead to the same levels of concern?
So I don't know about 25, 25, 25 because the remaining 25, if that's one more MNO, one more incumbent or a regional who grew to 25, then you would have four players who I think would be relatively comfortable in their positions and would probably not want to disrupt that market very much. If the big three, became 25, 25, 25, and then you had a dynamic competitive market of MVNOs that occupied the other, and regional incumbents who occupied the other 25, that might be a competitive environment. Right now, how they have it divided up, I guess, for lack of a better word, how they sit at 30, 30, 30, gives them a fairly comfortable position to not really rock the boat and do anything that's going to change things too much. TELUS's statement the other day or yesterday in their presentation that they would reduce investment is certainly interesting in this way. It would be interesting to see if other MNOs would step up to occupy the market that TELUS would be abandoning by doing that. And that would certainly look more like competitive dynamics. If they don't, that looks more like market power to me.
Just based on the way you responded to that last point, I would assume, not to speak for TELUS, but a large portion of their suggested decrease in investment would probably be in regions which are not as well served as more urban areas. So is it realistic that an MVNO could move into those areas and fill the gap, investment or otherwise, in those types of regions?
No, I may have misspoken, but what I meant was the supposed competition among facilities-based carriers, among, say, the three MNOs. I think, if TELUS were to announce to us that they are no longer going to invest, I think it was $1 billion over 5 years in some areas, then if you saw other MNOs that they're at 30, 30, 30, if you saw either Bell or Rogers step in to say, okay, well then we'll grow into that market that you have abandoned, that would look like competitive dynamics. If none of them will do that, and they are prepared to let that market not be served, that looks more like market power. Rather than MVNOs stepping in to fill that gap. I was talking about the sort of dynamic among the MNOs.
Okay, thank you. Moving through the points of clarification, you stated in your various submissions that you're of the view that flanker brands are competition theater that provide the illusion of competition and serve to stave off regulatory action that would enable real competition. In your minds, do flanker brands provide any benefit at all?
So flanker brands are just services of the main MNOs. So to the extent that they offer more price points that people want, that's fine. That part I don't think we take issue with. The part that is competition theater and that we think is harmful is marketing them under different names and very separately, and often not transparently at all. That is designed to create really the illusion of competition where there is no competition. When they are used, when they are really weaponized to go after real competition, this is certainly our experience on the wireline side, then they do certainly harm that real competition. That has not been the case yet on the wireline side, to my knowledge, because that competition is not there to be attacked. But really the theater is behaving as though these are operating independently as competitors with each other when really they are not.
I would say as well that the illusion of flanker brands is the creating the perception of more competitors in the marketplace, when the reality is that the flanker brands do not compete with the MNO's main brands or premium brands or with each other within a single corporate entity. They are really not creating more dynamic competition, perhaps more offers and perhaps more marketing opportunities to segment customers, but they don't compete against compete against the main company, which raises a question as to whether they are truly providing a dynamic competitive element into the marketplace. And as Andy said, on the wireline side, we've seen them weaponized, and we've seen reflected in shareholder comments themselves, which we've included in our submissions, that the flanker brands are really just part of their overall marketing strategy. They're not a competition strategy against their main brands. So they're really there to create the illusion that there's sufficient competition in the marketplace and a lot of options to choose from when that's not truly the case.
Just to play devil's advocate for a moment, some may say that consumers don't care who they buy it from or who the underlying provider is. They want what they want when they want it at the price that they're willing to pay. So perhaps you could explain to me, in your view, what benefits and innovation that MVNOs would bring to the marketplace that currently aren't being offered by the flanker brands.
Sure, and actually I think this might be a good place to pivot off to some of our international experts who can bring examples from international experiences as well. But overall, MVNOs are able to provide differentiated service offerings, which is one of the things that the 2019 policy direction asks for. And that is because MVNOs are focused on service-based competition. In order to be successful, MVNOs need to, as we have on the wireline side, focus on delivering the best service, most cost-effective service to their customers. That is the way that MVNOs will differentiate. So that is going to be what primarily drives an MVNO, which makes its incentives completely different than what you will see from a facilities-based provider. I think there's a ton of examples where MVNOs internationally have provided affordable options, low-cost prepaid and postpaid plans, potentially serving different niches of customers, low income, fixed income, seniors, for example. And we simply are not seeing that in the Canadian marketplace right now. And those are all kinds of options, as well as technology-driven options, that could be opened up by MVNOs in the marketplace. So perhaps I'll ask Martin if you've got a couple examples, and then maybe Ish after.
Yes, if I can give a bit of perspective from the US market, and I'm referring here really to essentially a 20-year history. And some MVNOs have been around for that long, and many of them came and flamed out. That's the nature of competition. Not everyone is going to succeed. And what they have done often is been pioneers, actually, kind of laboratories, if you will, from the perspective of the MNO, without the MNO having to do it themselves, of trying to serve particular customer segments that the MNO hasn't really been paying much attention to. And then if they succeed up to a certain point, well, maybe sometimes they remain independent, like consumer cellular, which is focused upon seniors living on fixed incomes who want to know exactly how much they're going to have to pay and need to have tremendous customer service, perhaps more customer service than millennials, who are much more familiar with dealing with digital devices. And they score much more highly, for example, than AT&T in surveys of customer satisfaction. There have been people who've gone after particular ethnic groups, providing free international calls to the places which they want to remain in touch with. Companies that have gone after they're still unbanked, providing money transfer services, which of course are major, undercutting Western Union. So I think there are a number of examples, and several of them, pioneered by MVNOs, have then been taken up by the MNOs, either themselves or because they've actually acquired the MVNO and they at least continued it for a certain amount of time. So I think in terms of services-based competition, you'll just see a much greater variety of innovation, a much greater spread. And some of them won't work, but it doesn't matter, because if they fail, it's not as if they're going to lose their mobile service, and others will be successful and then will be adopted into the mainstream in ways which wouldn't happen if it had been left up entirely to the MNOs themselves.
Thank you for, I guess, the context on the U.S. market, because it does lead me to a question, just so I'm sure I'm clear in my own mind. You submitted that MVNOs in the U.S. operate under a light touch regulatory regime, which you argue enables MNOs to exercise dominant market power in their negotiations with MVNOs. You also argue that this has limited the ability of U.S. MVNOs to launch new services at affordable prices. However, you also stated that MVNOs in the U.S. offer a diversity of plans serving various market niches with plans that cost consumers as little as $9 a month. So given those statements, can you unpack that a little bit for me? I'm wondering, do you feel that had there been more regulatory intervention in the U.S., that the market would have been improved in some way, and if the CRTC were to take a light touch approach, that we could expect similar plans and pricing to be in the market in Canada?
Yeah, I'd like to make 2 points about that. One is that in the negotiations, and I'm referring particularly to those between the two largest MNOs, AT&T and Verizon, and the MVNOs, what is considered to be a commercially reasonable outcome is defined in incredibly vague terms. Like, in every circumstance, you have to take account of all the facts that are relevant. And that allows the MNO, in effect, to say, well, this is relevant because we've already established this deal with this other company, and what we're offering you is really not worse than that. To pick and choose which MVNO they're going to deal with, that usually involves the MVNO, particularly if it's an MVNO that's part of a much larger organization, And the biggest MVNO in the US, as you may know, is TracFone, which is owned by América Móvil, which itself is a huge multinational operator in Mexico and other places in Latin America. And obviously AT&T, for example, has an interest in its relationships with América Móvil that I'm sure plays a role in the way in which they'll respond to TracFone, which is focused quite naturally on the many Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants in the United States to provide services to them that have then actually now been offered also by the US major MNOs. So that's one aspect. What is the definition of commercially reasonable? And is it something that is fairly tightly defined, even to the level of saying these are the rates that you have to offer? Or is it something that's left open to a wide range of interpretation? And in these negotiations, in many cases, unless you happen to have a parent who's very large, you're basically a very small guy dealing with a very big guy. And the asymmetry of information that's involved in those negotiations, the consequences if the negotiations drag on for very long and you can't arrive at a conclusion, can be almost fatal to the small company, but it really doesn't matter the big guy at all. So you're left with a very unequal situation, and that is the concern. So the light regulatory regime has been, I think, because the FCC has not been willing to be precise or precise enough about what it means by commercially reasonable, which has allowed, therefore, the MNOs, and they often use this phrase in their filings, at their sole discretion. And I couldn't think of a more blatant way of saying, basically, we decide who's going to get access and under what conditions. And in practice, in many cases, even if you're negotiating a wholesale access rate, it turns out that there are other things involved in the deal. It may be that an MVNO or has a bit of spectrum somewhere. In fact, then it builds out networks as part of the deal. So that's my concern.
Okay, thank you. In one of your earlier submissions, you said that TekSavvy may offer low-cost occasional use plans, and we've been talking a lot about affordability and low-cost plans. Why is it a may and not a would? And if it is now a would, do you have any characteristics around a plan that perhaps that you would intend to offer if you became an MVNO that you could describe to us?
Sure. In our responses to the Commission's RFIs around low-cost plans, our primary position is that MVNOs writ large would have the opportunity to deliver low-cost plans to the market. A very important key precondition to the ability to deliver low-cost plans is how the wholesale rates are set. It's just not there's no business case for us to be able to offer low-cost plans where rates are too high and we can't sell below our fixed costs. So, I think generally our TekSavvy brand has always stood for honest and fair pricing. That's what we've done. That's how we price services on our wire line side. And you see that as well in terms of the types of options that we've developed over the years to help customers manage potential overages and also pushing for unlimited plans and being able to offer that to our customers. But we've always, in terms of how we've priced our products, kept in mind to sort of what is a fair way to price our services. So I think it's important to note that any providers, any MVNO's ability to offer affordable, low-cost plans is going to be directly related to what their fixed costs are and what they pay MNOs for access.
So the may ties back to ensuring that rates are just and reasonable, not to your willingness or lack thereof to put a low-cost plan in the market for low-income Canadians.
Correct, yes. And we have always designed our product catalog in mind in terms of making sure that there's an entry-level service that is as affordable as we can make it, again, based on the just reasonable costs. But yes, it is directly related to just and reasonable costs of wholesale services that are fixed.
Thank you. There are a number of things I could ask, but I note that you're obviously a member of CNOC. They appeared yesterday and had a conversation with Vice Chair Leisner. Is there anything in their testimony or submission which you do not agree with that you would like to highlight at this time?
No, I think we substantially agree with CNOC's submissions in this proceeding.
If something does come to you, feel free to file that as an undertaking if you want to give that a little bit more thought and review their comments from yesterday.
Thank you.
Just a couple of areas. I don't know if you were in the room or not, but I guess we had a conversation with the team from Eastlink earlier today, and they noted that from a size standpoint, TekSavvy is bigger than they are. They've bought spectrum. Why can't or haven't you, or entered into an arrangement with other providers to pool resources to buy spectrum or share spectrum?
I did hear that. I thought that was interesting, and we're both privately held companies. Certainly TekSavvy is, as far as I know, Bragg is as well, and so I can only guess that the measure by which we are larger is customer base. I'm not necessarily sure, and I
don't know what was the foundation of that statement either.
I mean, it was certainly the comment. It's the only measure that I can think of, and certainly customer base would not translate into the ability to purchase spectrum. So. Our size in that regard, I don't think is really relevant. We're just not capitalized in a way to try to create a new business model or create a sustainable business as a new facilities-based carrier. And we fundamentally disagree that that ought to be the goal as a new competitor. Facilities are limited, and spectrum is limited, and a competitive model built solely on spectrum and facilities-based competitors will tend toward a monopoly or a duopoly, essentially the two networks that we have now and with the three major carriers. The problems that we're trying to address here, the problems that you have heard from Canadians, and the problems that various proceedings have tried to address, certainly going back to the 2015 decision, relate to services. And the focus on encouraging more facilities-based carriers in order to somehow deliver those services later, that has just not come to fruition. So, why have we not purchased enough spectrum to launch a mobile carrier on our own? That spectrum has not been available and we would not have been able to afford it, and that ought to not be the way that we are trying to create competition on the service layer. Now, that being said, I will also say that TekSavvy has been getting more involved in spectrum process. We participated in the last two consultations concerning spectrum through ISED, Tier 5 serving areas, and the consultation on the 3500 megahertz auction. And we're watching that very closely and expect to participate. That is partly to support plans that we have to on our fixed wireless side and some of the facilities that we're getting to support the fixed wireless side. And partly it is because we are not really sure how mobile is going to play out here. And so we kind of need to do what we can while we can. The auctions only come along so often, and here's 3,500. And so we're watching it very closely to see if we need to participate. But it's certainly not our view that that is an effective way for us to enter the market as a competitor.
And I note that at paragraph 14 of your opening comments today, you said that the full MVNO framework must also not have obligations related to facilities or minimum investment levels. So from that, can I assume, and understanding that you're more engaged with I said spectrum consultations than perhaps you have been in the past, but should I take from that comment at paragraph 14 that if we were to implement a mandated MVNO model similar or identical to what the Bureau has put forward, that you would not be inclined to purchase spectrum to qualify for such a model?
I don't think that model is interesting to us. I mean, that's the simple way to put it. It would essentially allow us to operate. Well, it wouldn't allow us to participate, I think. We don't have the spectrum right now, and certainly, if you did something identical to the Bureau's model, it would have a 5-year sunset, which would not be enough time for us to launch as a mobile provider on full MVNO, roll out, acquire spectrum, roll it out, and move customers over to that, to facilities. So that simply would not work for us, and I don't think that we would take advantage of it. The main thing about investment not being an obligation associated with full MVNO is really about what you value as really the important type of competition that's happening here. If you're trying to create many facilities-based providers who all own their own spectrum and compete with each other, and then the full MVNO model on the Competition Bureau's proposal would basically accelerate somebody into the market. It would take you 5 years to put these people onto spectrum that you're going to do anyway. We'll just accelerate those people onto your network now. It really assumes that the end goal is to have the spectrum and have the facilities and move people onto that, and that's going to be some kind of sustainable and sufficient competition between facilities. The reason that we don't believe that investment in facilities ought to be an obligation of MVNO is that MVNO is an end on its own. So, sustainable competition is possible and, in fact, common in outside of Canada on a wholesale model, on a full MVNO model.
Okay. Just one final question, and then I'll turn you over to my colleagues. And it's on the topic of not investment. I can certainly understand why it would be advantageous for you to be able to offer wireless services to your customers to complete the bundle with your other services. Then why not simply enter into a resale arrangement with one of the national operators? Is that lack of interest on their part, lack of interest on your part? Have negotiations broke down in the past?
We have entered into some negotiations with one of the big three, looking for a MVNO model that gave us a high degree of control, and they're simply not open to it. They were not actually prepared to do a resale model. They were prepared to do, basically, we would sell their brand to our customers.
And was some of their resistance, do you believe, tied to the fact that they just didn't, because they do resale arrangements with other companies that don't compete with them for other services like President's Choice or Petro-Canada. Was that resistance on their part because you potentially are taking some customers away from them, or was there another reason than that?
I guess it's hard to say what was motivating that on their side. Certainly, the competitive dynamic between us is there and might factor into it. I can't be sure. Did you want?
Not specific to the negotiation aspects, which Andy is privy to more than I am, but certainly from a brand perspective, when we think about what we would want to bring to a wireless market, absolutely, a wireless product adds to our ability to offer customers a quad play, which we know they want. But we look at our brand, and we have always prided ourselves in being different in a good way and offering services honestly, fairly, and transparently. So we've designed our packages independently. We've been able to, on the wireline side, innovate over time to offer different types of usage control options. And those are key things that our customers look for in terms of not being able or not being shocked for bill shock and things like that. So having that independence to design a product that is consistent with the way that we offer the rest of our services is very critical to how we would want to add wireless to the complement of services that we want our customers to have.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Levy. Pardon me, Commissioner Levy.
Thank you. I guess one of the questions I had has to do with the two gentlemen who are here from other countries. Were we to mandate an MVNO regime, what are the sort of one or two takeaways that we might benefit from your experience in the jurisdictions that you know the most about? What are the things that we should pay the most attention to, given your experience, that would make it an all-round success for everybody?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I think that in Australia, MVNOs as a feature of the market emerged commercially. In some of the other jurisdictions that I'm familiar with, it's resulted from regulatory intervention. In both cases, one of the key elements of value that MVNOs can bring to the market is the kind of competitive differentiation, the service innovation that Andy spoke about before, and their ability to bring new types of packages to bear has been quite important. And if that level of control is not afforded by commercial negotiations, then I think that it's important that it is afforded by regulatory backstop, if you like. So in Australia, for example, there are 60 MVNOs. Some of them are commonly held. But what's particularly important is the way that they've been able to innovate. And there's some detail in my report, particularly box 1 at page 25, which talks about what sort of competitive dynamics amongst the MNO market might have led MNOs to voluntarily host MVNOs. But those competitive dynamics in Australia led to a great degree of control for MVNOs over the type of services they were able to offer. Just to contrast that with Malaysia, which is another market that I'm quite familiar with, the regulator there decided to intervene recently in the last few years to mandate MVNO access, despite the fact there were several MVNOs already active in the market. And the reason for that, in the regulator's words, were that the MVNOs that were present in the market at the time were all thin MVNOs. They weren't able to differentiate very much from their host mobile operators. And so it was important to create the kind of vibrancy that you see from a more competitive market, that there was a regulatory backstop that allowed them to increase the level of control they had over their own packages and differentiation.
Yes, thank you. So to add to that, or give a U.S. perspective, I think there are a couple of points. One is, why a full MVNO rather than any other kind of MVNO? And the point there is to maximize the independence of movement, the independence of competitiveness of the MVNO, in particular that they control, no, control is the wrong word, that they are dealing directly with the customer. They provide the SIM card. Another aspect of that is that if you're an MVNO, you don't want to be stuck with one operator. You really want to be able to access all of them. And in fact, there are a number of imaginative ideas that I'm aware of in the US, and maybe there are in other countries too, in which the MVNO proposes to have a really intelligent SIM so that literally the customer will have access to, at any particular time, at any particular location, that network which provides the highest quality service. And as we know, particularly in dense urban areas, a network that happens to be the best one to be using at a certain time of day may turn out not to be the best network to be using at another time of day. So to be able to guarantee, there's there are a lot of metrics that are put forward about the speed with which networks deliver, but really one of the key things that customers notice is consistency, that you want to know, oh my gosh, I got a really rapid delivery here, and now it seems to be crawling along like a car that's only firing on one cylinder out of 6. So that's one aspect. It has to be a full MVNO, and then the other one, of course, is the cost. Any MVNO that puts together a business plan, it has certain costs that are under its control. It can be as efficient as it wants, but if it has to pay an unreasonable amount for access to the network, it'll kill it. So how you go about that is tough. There are lots of arguments about what are the costs and how they should be accounted for. But I think it has to be cost-based, and it also has to be subject to review fairly frequently. One of the problems that we've got into in some of these negotiations in the U.S. is that people say, well, this price was okay, with this company. Yes, but that was 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the things that is driving prices down is, as you know, the fantastic advance of technology. The devices, the equipment, that's literally a global, I hate to use the typical word consultancy, but a global ecosystem, very, very competitive. And I mean, the wireless story is just an incredible success. I'm old enough to remember how wrong my predictions were a long time ago. It's an incredible success. So you need to be ambitious in thinking about what is the proper price. And we see now wholesale access rates that are higher than many, many retail prices. And that, to me, clearly makes a business plan infeasible.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barrett?
Thank you. We've heard several times in the course of this process that potential MVNOs have been offered the option by carriers to function as MVNOs, but under the brand of the carrier. And I'm curious, in the course of your negotiations, when that was put on the table, was it to offer a different product under the brand of the carrier, or was it a recognition that there was another subset of customers that you would be able to get with different pricing and packaging options, but under the brand of the carrier?
I don't believe our negotiations went into that kind of detail. We were at the stage where we were, trying to come to even more general terms about it being resale or not resale, and it wasn't on its own. This was in the context of a possible arranged negotiation that included many other elements. This was one part of it. So it did not go into details about what plans would be available, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
I have perhaps one last question, and I'm trying to figure out how to word it in a way that I neither speak for someone who appeared this morning or sound like I'm adopting their position. But you mentioned several times, well, in your opening remarks, you talked about needing mobile services in order to have sustainable margins. And later, in some of your responses to questions from Commissioner McDonald, you emphasized the need to get the wholesale rate right and terms and conditions right so that you have enough margin to offer services. And clearly, one of the driving features of MVNOs would be to bring lower prices, whether it's targeting particular ethnic groups. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the offers we're talking about are lower price. So Mr. Bragg this morning, who also is a privately held, said, and is not one of the big three, isn't a national player, is a competitor to the big three, and has invested in spectrum, basically said in response to a question, the same question Commissioner McDonald asked you, could you offer a low-cost service? And he said, I do. And I think the number, if I stand to be corrected, was a $30 service. And quite properly, we asked him, could you offer a lower-cost service than that? And his answer was, no, it would be below my costs. So without getting into an argument of costs, how do you enter a market on a wide scale, such as you propose, without having an adverse impact on perhaps smaller facilities-based entrants? And how do you enter those smaller markets? I get Toronto, I get Montreal, but use that as an example. I'm not taking a position, I'm just using it as an example to say, so how do you offer lower cost service in an area where the new entrant is struggling to offer a service he submits at $30?
So first, just to be sure, it's clear, our full MVNO model would only mandate, our proposal would only mandate access on the large, the big three, Bell, Rogers, and TELUS.
Understood.
Rates that were set properly would be based on cost inputs, cost plus, and our view is that the margins indicate that there is sufficient room for much lower priced services. What exactly those will be, it's really impossible to say without knowing the rates. But I will say that as a competitor on the wireline side, our mission there really is to sell services that people can afford, that meet their needs as much as possible. And certainly through the rates fiasco, without litigating that here, we have had an extremely hard time with our margins as we have tried to bring the lower prices promised by those wholesale rates to consumers. Our priority there was to bring those lower prices to consumers. That's what that was for. And as a result there, our margins are extremely, extremely thin right now. Unsustainably thin. So on the mobile side, I can say that we would be motivated by the same things. Not that we want to live with unsustainably thin margins forever, but that we are fundamentally driven by what our customers need, and will go to great lengths to bring them the kinds of packages that they want. So what exactly those prices would be, what constitutes the cheapest price we would be able to do entirely depends on rates.
From a pure math perspective, I would say I would go back to looking at different regions in Canada where the market share is controlled and is dominated by sort of the big three. So just from a pure math perspective, the customers that we would be seeking to attract would be those that are probably with the big three, because that's where the numbers are. And to be quite frank, our success on the wireline side has largely been because our customers are looking for an option that's not the big three. So that would be consistent sort of with what we've heard from our own customers who, quite frankly, call Andy, Charlie, and I often sit on the floor and take customer demand so that we're connected to what our customers are asking for. And they're often asking for, you know, we love what you're doing on the wireline side. Can you also be our wireless service provider? So I think that, I suppose I would say that the adverse impact on smaller competitors is perhaps exaggerated because if you look at the market structure, when you have dominant players that are still the big three, which is no different than 5 years ago, that's probably where most of our new entrants into the wireless sphere, if we are able to, that's where our growth will start.
Sorry, if I may, I think Ish had something to add. Is that right?
Just from an international perspective, and I've heard kind of other interveners in the proceedings talk about Canada's wide geographic area and low population density. Australia obviously has similar characteristics, and the mobile operators and MVNOs in Australia deal with that as well. And some of the prices that they're able to offer are outlined in my report in tables 2 and 3, but we're talking about things like a $15 price, that's in Australian dollars, so cheaper again in Canadian real price terms, for 3 gig of data, unlimited calls and text. And that's while MNOs continue to have quite a healthy EBITDA as a result of, despite the MVNO presence in Australia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your submissions and your fulsome responses to our questions.